Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope everyone's having a great Friday, a great day to have a workshop on rethinking assessments. We're going to wait just another minute or so to make sure all of our attendees can get into the workshop, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, it is 10:03. Looks like we haven't had anybody join now for a few minutes, so I think we're safe to get started. So, hi everyone again. On behalf of LSU Online and Continuing Education, I'd like to welcome you to today's workshop, Rethinking Assessments. Today's workshop is the third workshop in the fall series, Preparing Your Course for Fall 2020. Just to kind of recap the previous workshops that we've offered so far. In workshop 1, we did Design to Align, where we discussed basic principles of course design and alignment that can be applied across various delivery modalities. Followed by workshop 2, where we discussed the high flex course model, where we discussed key principles to consider for, different blended or online course modalities such as learner choice, equivalency, reusability, and accessibility. So building on that concept of alignment and some of the principles of the high flex model, in today's workshop, we are going to discuss how you can reimagine traditional assessments in light of student and faculty constraints, your essential learning goals, and the different tools and technologies available. So to start, we'll do some introductions. My name is Jennifer Morissette. I'm the Assistant Director of Learning Experience Design, Resources, and Effectiveness. I'm joined today by our co-facilitators, our director, Dr. Radhika Krishnadas. Radhika, if you can.
Hi, everyone. This is Radhika Krishnadas. I'm the Director of Instructional Design and Development with LSU Online, aka HALA, on the screen. Because we are using HALA's account, so you'll see us all as HALAs.
And we also have Megan McClure with us. She is one of our e-learning authors. Megan, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Megan McClure. I'm one of the e-learning authors. I'm here to help out in the chat and answer any Moodle questions you may have, since I'm one of the on-the-ground course designers. And I'm also HALA today, so sorry about that.
HALA 1, 2, and 3 today. A little bit more about our team, the LSU Online Design and Development team. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to us as the D&D team. We partner closely with you, with faculty, to create high-quality learning experiences, and we incorporate instructional design and user experience and other design principles when we're talking about designing online courses and blended courses. We also offer professional development offerings such as this workshop series, and we provide support and guidance to faculty who are designing, redesigning, and teaching courses through blended or online delivery. So as we just mentioned, as we move through this workshop today, please feel free to post questions in the chat. And we're also going to be using the poll feature for a question later on in the workshop. So just become familiar with that in your toolbar area. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our workshop objectives, just to kind of recap this, by the end of the workshop, you're going to be able to explore the alternatives to traditional assessments that meet the intended outcomes, are student-centered, manageable, and scalable. Identify tools and technology available at LSU to design and facilitate formative and summative assessments. Design relevant assessments that align with essential course outcomes using available tools and technology, and select scoring tools such as rubrics based on intended outcomes. So in short, our objectives for this session, we are going to be looking at some alternatives to current assessments that could be flexed to suit different modalities, are comparatively low tech, which is important, and that can scale as necessary. So we're going to consider different options. We'll look at different tools and technology as we design and implement these assessments. So let's kind of dig in, shall we? I'd like to kind of recap here on just a review of assessment. We did post on the website when you registered for this workshop to review a little video called the assessment strategy video. So just to kind of recap that, when we talk about defining assessment, because this term can often mean different things, especially in education, to different people. So when in this workshop, when we say assessment, what we really mean is that it's the process of measuring student understanding of and proficiency in course learning outcomes. So in general, there are two forms of assessment in your courses. Those are going to be the formative assessment and the summative assessment. The formative assessment evaluates student learning over time, and the purpose is more about informing the student of their level of understanding of the material. So it's meant to be more of, those quick knowledge checks so that they can, kind of redirect their efforts and things like that, in order to increase their or better perform in the course. And the summative assessment, that is the comprehensive measure and evidence of learning at the end of the course. So an example of this could be a comprehensive final exam or maybe like a term paper or something like that. The other thing I wanted to kind of define here too is what we mean when we say a traditional assessment. So a traditional assessment is really that, the conventional assessment of, using discrete items, very objective, like a multiple choice exam, but also that, maybe there's a single version, every student gets the same version of that exam, and it's administered at the same time and location. So, when we have finals, all of the students are going to show up at a particular day and time, and they're all in the same classroom, and they're all under the supervision of either the instructor, maybe, a TA or something like that. So it's typically proctored too. Okay, so the challenge, when we're talking about the traditional assessment and challenges when we are implementing this into an online modality, as many of you probably experienced this past spring and maybe what you're currently doing this summer as well, but a sudden shift to a different course delivery modality can impact your ability to successfully implement assessments that were originally designed to be administered in an in-person environment under the supervision of an instructor or another proctor. So for example, some of these challenges might include conflicting schedules or, needing to coordinate work, school, family priorities. It may be difficult for this instructor and the student to be present at the same time synchronously, you know, whether that's dealing with internet outages, maybe there are third-party vendor capacity issues, as you know, many of us experience that with ProctorU at the end of the spring semester. And of course, the associated fees that maybe that go along with using a third-party vendor or something like that. The other part of that too is you are often needing to learn a new system and learning, you know, different settings just to even get your assessment set up. So there's a learning curve involved, not only for the faculty member, but also for the student taking the exam. So of course that could impact their performance on the exam if they haven't been exposed to that technology previously. And so that may, that would definitely have an impact on their performance potentially. And then of course, ensuring academic integrity. If we're not going to be using a proctor, what are strategies and things that we can be thinking about for ensuring academic integrity? So really, essentially what, kind of to reiterate that, what can happen is the assessment scenario, you're kind of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And this is ultimately because the circumstances of the learning and the measurement process has changed when you're shifting to a different modality. So therefore, your assessments, you really need to maybe reimagine that process and help to control for some of that unpredictability. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to go over a few different examples. So how can we control for some of these different challenges, but still maintain your evaluation goal and the integrity of your assessments? Okay, so I'd like to pause here and I'm going to start a poll. Give me one moment here while I try and figure out how to do this again. But the question I would like you to answer is, what do you anticipate the biggest challenge to be in implementing your course assessments online? So I'm going to launch the poll now. So you'll be able to select your top answer. And I'm going to end the poll here in a few moments and I'll share the results. And also, if there is not an option here that is something that you're concerned with or that you think will be a big challenge for you, please go ahead and share that in the chat and we can share that with the rest of the attendees. Okay, so it looks like 100% have voted. So I'm going to share the results. And it looks like 14% coordinating work, school, and family priorities is a challenge. Nobody's really concerned about vendor or technology issues with capacity. 14% is learning the new systems and settings. Fees aren't an issue, but 71% is ensuring academic integrity, and rightfully so. Dr. Krishnadas, were there any other options listed in the chat?
No, no other questions or suggestions or comments here.
Okay. Okay, so the framework, how can you approach rethinking your assessments to kind of offset some of the challenges that we just talked about? Well, we can use a framework, and this is to consider, these are the different considerations you should have when you are designing your assessment strategy, and they're going to help direct that strategy. So asking these questions can help identify basically those parameters within which you can redesign your assessment. So the first step is always to look at your course outcomes. So thinking back to what was discussed in workshop 1, that design to align workshop, we touched on aligning assessments to outcomes. So going through that alignment exercise can really help to clearly and specifically show what you want students to be able to demonstrate. So this may be problem solving, critical thinking, or writing skills, synthesis, analysis, you know, whatever those outcomes may be. So in going through that process, you may gain some insight here as to the best task to evaluate the proficiency of your students or a specific skill or competency. So just kind of going through that exercise to start will help you kind of narrow your focus and target on exactly what it is you want students to be able to do. But it's also a helpful exercise for you to kind of reflect on your current assessment, to reevaluate what, you know, whether or not it actually is aligned. So you may find that given your particular course outcomes, that maybe your assessment can be, you know, delivered in a little bit of a different way, use a different strategy, a different assessment type. And so we're going to talk about a few different examples after this slide here. So the next thing you want to think about are your students' constraints. So do you know whether or not they're going to have limited or inconsistent access to the internet? You know, given, you know, the experience that you may have had at the end of the spring semester, you may have had a lot of students that had varying schedules. They had you know, a lot of issues with getting access to reliable internet. So these are things to kind of be thinking of and planning ahead for. You know, maybe they have different caregiving responsibilities. They could even be in a different time zone if they're not actually in Louisiana, and maybe they're at home with their families, especially if, you know, considering what may happen at the end of the semester and after Thanksgiving and things like that. So we want to be mindful of that. We don't want to put any kind of unnecessary burden on students or yourself to, you know, put the burden of changing a different exam, or maybe, you know, using the proctor, or having to you know, source different resources and kind of, you know, reschedule everything just to take the assessment. So we also don't want to introduce unnecessarily any inequities based on the technology access and things like that, right? So and paid proctors and whatnot. So another thing for you to think about is your typical class size. You know, if you typically have a large class, over 100 students or something like that, that is going to impact your design of your assessments and, you know, the different strategy you're going to take to deliver that. So there's different considerations for grading effort. You know, maybe will you have access to TAs helping you or other instructors? So these are all kind of the information gathering session here in this framework for determining those parameters. And then the last thing is the capabilities and limitations of the available tools here at LSU. So first and foremost, that's going to be Moodle typically. There's a lot of native tools within Moodle, little different features and functionalities, many of which are going to improve, and there'll be more things available with our upgrade to 3.7 that's currently in progress. So knowing the different capabilities and limitations of the tools is also going to help you leverage certain functionalities, right? So that we can deliver an assessment type that will help control, again, for some of those issues, like especially academic integrity. There's a few things that we can do in the settings in Moodle to help with that. So kind of in closing here, once you identify your challenges, you can, that inform those parameters, you can focus on creating a strategy to assess your students. So as part of the assessment strategy, again, kind of thinking back to that video, if you were able to watch that, it's more than just the assessment itself. It also impacts the organization of your course, the different resources that you may need to provide to the student. So and kind of as an example here, what I mean is if you are going to take a different assessment approach, maybe you're going to chunk those assessments and break them up into smaller assessments instead of having like larger high stakes assessments. Maybe your modules need to be organized in a particular way, and your supporting materials need to be organized in a particular way such that students are able to get the resources they need and then take those assessments and progress through the course. Be thinking of that when we're going through some different examples today of how that may impact not only your current assessment, but the organization of your course and the different resources that you currently have and how you may need to add on to that. Okay, so let's take a look at a few scenarios of alternative assessment examples. Unless there's any questions so far, do we need to pause for that?
No questions.
Okay. Okay, so this first example is unproctored objective exams. So some of the examples that we're going to go through today, if you want to think of these as kind of like on a spectrum or continuum of, what's closest to that traditional conventional assessment versus, what's least conventional, and different examples we're going to go over there. But to start, we're going to go over this unproctored objective exam, and this is basically administering your traditional exam, if it is like a multiple choice exam, but without the use of a proctor. So in this case, what we're going to control for is we're going to eliminate any vendor issues, right? Any associated fees. And then we're also going to try to control for the academic integrity by leveraging some of the functionality of the LMS. So one way to do this is basically just to add on to your question bank and draw on the different capabilities of organizing your question bank so that you can maybe draw questions from pooled categories and randomly pull those questions. So when you do that, every student essentially, if your question bank's large enough, every student essentially could get a different iteration of that assessment, right? So maybe there's some questions that are the same throughout different exams for different students, but the exam itself with each specific item and the order in which those items appear would be different. So those types of things kind of help to control for some of that, sharing questions, especially if you have an open window or a larger window where, a student may take the exam and then later on another student can take the exam, and we're concerned about sharing the questions and things like that. Well, that student may have a completely different exam than the other student. And the other thing really is to make the attempt timed. So using the timing feature on the Moodle quiz will allow the student to basically have a narrower window or opportunity of time to go and look for look for the responses either in the textbook or online or, you know, something like that. So the other option here outside of the Moodle functionality is how you want to maybe write your items in your assessment. So you might want to consider using more scenario-based questions that are placed in kind of real world situations. And this helps to ensure that learners can't find the exact answer in the textbook or an internet search. So you want to do this kind of, does it pass the search engine test? So search online for the answer to an assessment that you've created. And if the question is written in a way that can be easily found when you're typing it in the search engine, then you may want to consider revising that. Okay, so I just kind of have a screenshot here of an example of what I just mentioned in terms of the Moodle question bank, and then this is just an editing window in the Moodle quiz. So here on the left, this is a snapshot of the categories area in the Moodle question bank. So you can create parent categories and then nested child categories, and the smallest category that you see, where in this case there it's just 2, but you can go as far as you need to. That smallest category is where you're going to randomly pull questions from. So in this particular example, the question bank is organized by the learning objective or course outcome. You could do it that way too. Tied back to also that particular module where that item is maybe covered. So that's kind of good practice just for, again, that alignment exercise that we've mentioned a few times here, by actually organizing your assessment by the category, by outcome, learning outcome. And then also even the item name itself can be linked to a particular learning objective. That's going to help you kind of construct your assessment so that you are pulling adequately across the construct of your assessment, right? So if you have different topics that you want to make sure all of those topics are going to be on that assessment for each student, but you want to have different questions appear for each student, then you need to organize the categories appropriately so that you can make sure that you're pulling random questions from appropriate categories. So what we don't want to do, for example, is have a super large question bank and you're just randomly pulling 50 questions from 150 questions, because at that point there's no way to tell Moodle that to pull these types of questions versus other types of questions on like a particular topic. So if we're kind of thinking about like that construct validity piece of the assessment, it's better to have these organized in smaller chunks based on what you're assessing. And then just really quickly, this is what it would look like on the edit quiz window. You see here where it says random, here on the right-hand side where it says add. If I were to click there, it would say add a random question. And then it would pull up this question bank category, and you can choose from the various categories. So this M05 Learning Objective 1, this is the category name. So you can see here, there are 3 random questions being pulled from Module 5 Learning Objective 10. Okay, are there any questions on this before I move on?
Yeah, there was a question, I think Megan answered it. If I have 10 different items for a quiz and have a question bank of 20 questions with 2 questions per item topic, how do I get Moodle to randomize all 10 topics and not end up with 2 questions for each topic on the quiz? That is, only 5 of the topics show up. That was a question, and Megan answered, when you randomly pull a question, you choose the exact number per category.
Yes, yes. And also you can, so let me kind of back up here too, just to elaborate on what I mentioned. Kind of a rule of thumb is to have at least 2, we recommend usually 3 versions of an item for every question you're going to pull. So if your exam is 50 questions, we recommend having 150 questions in the question bank. And that kind of logic would apply for each subcategory. So if you're pulling one question from a particular topic, right, you want to make sure there are 3 comparable questions within that smaller category. If you're pulling 2 questions from that topic, you want to make sure there's 6 items in there. That's just best practice. You don't have to do that. It's not like it wouldn't work or anything, but that's just our kind of general rule of thumb. Were there any other questions?
No.
Okay. Okay, so the next assessment example I'd like to go over is kind of that next step. So we just talked about the traditional assessment, but without a proctor, but it's still kind of objective with that multiple choice. We're just going to expand the question bank and randomly pull questions. In this assessment type, you could do the same, except it's really going to be focused more on the open book. So it's still not proctored, but instead of the objective type items, they're going to be more higher order thinking skills. So we sometimes call this HOTS. That's higher order thinking skills. And so this is going to help generate more unique responses from the students. So anytime you can do an assessment where there is a unique response from the student, meaning it's kind of open-ended, they have to write the answer themselves. But it's also, they also have to, you know, be able to provide some sort of reflection on that question. So what I mean by like open-ended, I don't also mean that it's an objective item and they're just typing in the correct response versus a multiple choice selection. So this is, again, going to be a little bit more of those conceptual type questions. For example, that could be questions like, what would happen if this, or maybe explain this concept through this particular theory, or what would be the next rational step in this process. You could also maybe provide an image or a chart and ask questions around that particular image or chart. You could use questions that include phrases like what's the most appropriate or most important, and have the student kind of justify their answer. So this helps with the judgment and demonstrates how well students understand those concepts and the nuances between different levels of correctness. And then the other point here is that we want to make sure whenever we have these types of questions on assessments, especially major assessments, it's important to make sure that these types of questions have been presented to the student previously in the course, whether that's through, you know, a different activity or homework, or maybe a quiz or something like that. So we don't want to just kind of surprise the student on the final assessment with these types of questions when everything else has been the objective multiple choice. So we want to give them opportunities to practice on that factual recall and comprehension, but also practice on that conceptual application that would be expected of them on the exam. And then in terms of the different technologies or functionality that you could leverage in Moodle for this assessment type, and again, it depends on what you're wanting the students to do, the types of questions they're responding to, but this could be just the Moodle assignment activity, which is that Dropbox activity where the student is uploading Word document or something like that. So maybe you have the exam kind of prepared in a Word document, and they're able to download that, fill out their responses, and upload that. Probably one of the, I'm just kind of thinking of an example of myself because I'm personally in kind of dissertation mode right now. I'm a PhD candidate now, but when I took my general exam in my particular program, I remember some of my committee members gave me the option of doing kind of right on demand proctored assessment for my general exam, or I got the option of the take-home exam. And so from the student perspective, it was like, oh, the take-home exam, that's great. I don't have to go in and like right on demand. But the expectation, the output that was expected for that take-home exam that was not proctored was way more, ended up being way more work. But that's kind of what I mean about like maybe it's the same type of assessment questions you could have on a proctored versus non-proctored, but the level of quality that you're expecting from your student when it is an open book exam is going to be much, much greater. Any questions on that?
No questions thus far.
Okay. Okay, this next assessment example is a group assessment type of activity. And so this may be helpful if you have a small class size, but it also could be for larger class sizes too, where you're able to break the larger class into smaller groups. So in this example, the small groups will collaborate to basically generate the learning questions. So this is kind of almost like a flipped, like reverse engineering approach to an assessment. So you would want to start with some sort of assigned reading or some other sort of learning resource, and then the groups would meet, whether that's through Zoom or chat, or maybe they're in the discussion forum or something like that, and they're basically reflecting on that reading, and they're going to create questions based on some sort of criteria or framework that you provide them. So an example of this could be, maybe based on this reading, they're going to find what the key details are of this reading, or maybe locate the single most important moment in that reading, or one that seems worthy of further investigation. So you want to aim for kind of the smallest possible unit in terms of what the student, the types of questions that they're going to be responding or creating rather. So this helps them to kind of think a little bit more deeply about that particular moment in the reading, but then also consider how it may fit into the bigger picture. So with that, they could also create kind of these overarching questions. So maybe they would need to locate the larger idea within the text or that resource that seems to kind of circle or explore and have them and take up. So frame a question about the larger idea that seeks more reflective understanding about the text. So maybe they need to find a few phrases within the text that resonate with a particular concern. It might be useful to think of this as a question that the text has for us. So instead of questions we have for the text, if that makes sense. And then because these are group assessments, you may want to leverage peer assessment. And there are different activities you can use in Moodle to help facilitate this. Peer assessment is really, if you're going to use peer assessment, the workshop activity actually is a great activity type that will help facilitate the different stages of group work, but also it helps with peer assessment as well. So just something to keep in mind, investigate. There is going to be some information well, there is information on Moodle Docs on the workshop activity type, and then I think in Grok we'll have some information there as well with the upgrade. Any questions? I'm seeing the chat.
Yeah, we had questions. We have students who hire professionals to complete homework assignments. A coworker had a student who hired someone to take exams. What might we do to reduce this risk? So one of the suggestions was professional proctoring, where the face of the student and the identity is revealed. The other was, I've seen some programs that have students sign an honor code before they take their assessment. So kind of a professional integrity, conveying that. Do you have any other suggestions, Jennifer?
Well, one suggestion that's always helpful, especially if your assessments are more open-ended, which is actually an advantage in that if you have the different questions in the homeworks or other places in the course where you're able to kind of get a feel for that student's particular writing style, you might be surprised how unique that is to a particular person. So if you're used to seeing things turned in from the student written in a particular way, and then all of a sudden their final assessment is like, whoa, this is not, like, you can kind of just tell it's not them. I mean, that might raise some red flags there to investigate further. I don't know, Dr. Krishnadas, do you have any suggestions?
No, I think those are, like Megan responded, the professional proctoring is your best bet for those kind of situations, or really create open-ended assignments and monitor the voice of the student. There's not much we can do beyond that.
Okay. So this is the final example I'd like to talk about, and this is kind of like the end all be all thing of what we'd like to kind of strive for those application type assessments, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of the objective conventional assessment. And so this is the authentic assessment. And really, this is going to require the student to apply what they've learned and maybe apply that in a different situation. You're wanting the student to actually do a lot of the things that maybe you've discussed in your lectures or in the class. So these assessments simulate real world context. So brings in that situational awareness and context, so that students need to reflect on the particular situation and make judgment calls, and be able to justify why they made the decisions that they did. So when you're thinking about designing an authentic assessment, you definitely want to replicate the context in which students or in which adults would be tested. So this is even, in the workplace or in civic or, in personal life. So think of a situation where you have to make a decision essentially. And so you want the student to draw on the different principles, theories maybe that you've discussed in the class, and have them create an object or describe their particular response, in that particular situation. And this also allows for appropriate opportunities to rehearse, practice, consult resources, get feedback on refined performances and products. So again, the tasks in the authentic assessment are really multifaceted. They're not usually yes and no, one and done kind of assessment. They're more complex. They require higher order thinking skills because it's more integrative. They're going to draw on different parts of, you know, what they've learned in the course up to that point and create some sort of product or artifact based on that. So if I click to the next slide here, I have just a couple examples. And again, this is not, obviously not an exhaustive list. Any discipline, there would be a relevant authentic assessment, many authentic assessments across, you know, the different subject matter areas. So some of the examples I have here, create a business or marketing plan. So again, thinking about the key idea of real world context, students are performing within a given situation and they may need to explain their decision-making process. So in creating the business or marketing plan, maybe, you know, they need to go out and search for a particular business and do an analysis of that business by looking at their website, you know, their branding, different things like this, who's their target audience, what industry is this in, and then create a plan based on these different things. And then when they're in that plan, they also need to justify based on what was covered in the course, the different, you know, principles and theories. Why did they choose to make this plan? Why did they choose these key points and how it would benefit the consumer or that business? And then the other examples I have here, create functional computer code. So if you're in a maybe computer science course or something and you actually have the student create functional piece of code that would be usable in a particular situation. So it could be that they come up with that situation themselves based on different parameters, or maybe you provide, you know, the end user's needs in a website or, you know, something else, some sort of application, and then the student is creating the code to deliver that. And then the other example I have here is to create an infographic for community awareness. So infographics are interesting because they don't necessarily have to be, while we like them to be nice and pretty and polished, I mean, that's not the point of that particular assessment with students. You're not going to be assessing necessarily on how pretty something is, but it's more about how are they drawing on these succinct key ideas that are targeted to that particular audience, right? So that kind of helps to show that the student understands that this is an important, these are important key topics that need to be presented to the audience and consumed in a way that promotes awareness, you know, or whatever the situation may be in that particular course. But so a few other things that I had listed here in my notes, I just have like maybe creating a process chart or workflow diagram, or maybe play a policy session, creating function or a case analysis, you know, or something like that. That's another idea, example of an authentic assessment. So we have another question, and this is not in the poll. This is actually going to be in the chat. So can you think of an example of an authentic assessment for your course? And please post that in the chat. We're going to take a few minutes and we're going to describe some of these. So please go ahead and post some examples if you have any that you'd like to share in the chat, and we can share that with the rest of the attendees if you'd like to. Please also make sure when you are responding in the chat or posting in the chat that you post to everyone and not just the panelists.
have the first one come in, design a cloning plan for a specified gene and plasmid. From cost accounting, regression analysis problem with a memo explaining outcome and variables used.
Yeah, that's great.
2 excellent examples. Design a cloning plan, that would be really
I like that one too, the cloning
Mhm.
plan one. That's great.
That would be really cool. Design an experiment to evaluate P53 gene expression in breast cancer patient.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Freda says, I teach beginning journalism. I teach how to write a specific story, then send students out to write a story on a particular story style. A feature on Mike the Tiger is different than a new story on Mike the Tiger is sick. Sarah says, I like the idea of an infographic. I teach Spanish, beginning to intermediate, and culture often gets overlooked. This would be a great resource to present a cultural topic on a country, issue, etc.
That's a great idea.
Yes.
Because that brings in the research element and application.
Yes. Preparation of part of a disclosure schedule, which are exceptions to representations and warranties in a merger agreement. Wow. I teach mergers and acquisitions at the Law Center. That is direct application.
Yeah, these are all excellent, excellent examples of
Wonderful
authentic
ideas. Wow, this is great.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back to that infographic example, just something came to mind. I worked on a course one time. It was a horticulture course actually, and it was for online. So that in and of itself, being a horticulture course, was kind of difficult to put online. But the faculty member did have an infographic assignment where the student was doing research on a particular horticultural crop that was from around, whether it was the primary export of, a certain country. This was an international horticulture course. But the students were required to, based on their research, create an infographic that presented the key data of that particular country with the export, imports, and then different stats about that, also images of the different varieties and things like that. So it was a nice way for students, and then they shared that with the class, with their classmates. So, all right, well, these
Yeah,
are
I attended
all
an e-learning course once. So one of the authentic assessments were, we just covered all the learning theories. So they asked us to go out and look at popular sites like Udemy or Khan Academy or whatever, and ask us to look at the assignments and activities and kind of figure out what theories had been used to design the activities. So that was a great way of kind of reinforcing the theory and how that would apply in practice. Well, that was a great, yeah.
Great. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. I only have a few more slides here. The last thing I wanted to go over is just briefly touch on rubrics. So when we have these, more authentic type assessments or the open-ended type questions, it's important to have some sort of scoring tool to assess the student's performance. So really the rubric lays out the traits that will be evaluated in those gradations of quality. So you want to use the attributes of the course outcomes to make learning more meaningful. And then you can also ask students to self-assess and submit reflection. So there are two particular, oops, let me go back here. Two types of rubrics I wanted to touch on quickly. This is the holistic rubric and the analytic rubric. The holistic rubric is when you are most interested in just the overall quality of the product. Okay, so you're basically going to evaluate everything simultaneously. So it's not meant to be diagnostic, it's meant to be more summative, and it's an efficient type of rubric for large groups and when you want to just get a quick snapshot of that achievement. And then the analytic rubric, this is the one where you're more interested in breaking out those components and each dimension of the task so that you can evaluate the performance more at the subtask level. So when you do that, it's ideal for, or it allows opportunity for more targeted feedback on those subtask areas because you're actually you know, providing a score, a evaluative score on each of those tasks. So I'm going to show an example here. This is an analytic rubric example of a research paper. And so what I wanted to just kind of point out quickly here is the focus again on drawing out the different subcomponents of the diagnostics for diagnostics of students' strengths and weaknesses in that specific skill area. So for the research paper, this on the first column here, and this is the criteria the subtask components, right, that you're assessing, and then the standards based on how they perform each of these tasks. This would be the score that they get. So this you might be most familiar with this rubric type, but this is really good if you want to give students that feedback and clearly show how they're performing on each parts of the tasks. The next thing I would like to show is just an example of the holistic rubric. And so this is what we mean about the more summative nature that you can see here. There's nothing that's parsed out in terms of the different subcomponents. Basically, everything that is expected of the student in order to get a score here is described here in the criteria area. So you can kind of use your judgment here as to whether or not it's 85% or 95%, but in general, it's going to fall in this general area. Okay, so we're close here now at the end of our hour. So next steps would be to visit our website, online.lsu.edu, the faculty training and events site. And if you have not done so already, you can self-enroll into the Moodle resource course and also register for workshop number 4, which is going to be all about building in Moodle, which is, even if you're already really familiar with Moodle, I definitely recommend registering for this workshop because this is going to be offered after the upgrade to 3.7. So we're going to be pulling in some of the new features and functionalities of 3.7 here. So definitely try and attend that if you can. And again, assistance and support, as always, the FTC is available, and we will be starting our Zoom live faculty support again with our designers on July 6th. And that's all we have. So thank you everyone for attending today.
Jennifer, there's a question, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
When will we be able to request Moodle courses for fall 2020?
So do you mean the master courses in the new 3.7 template? Is that what you mean?
Yes, master courses for online. Yeah.
So master courses will be available on July 5th or July 6th, I think. So you should be able to request that from our website too.
Yeah, and I think if you have a Moodle course, master course already available, those will be moved over. So you don't have to request that again. That will be moved over, and then you can continue working in your master course. So if it's a new course, then yeah, you can request it after July 5th and everything has been moved over. There should be a link on the website. And we can include that information when we send out the PowerPoint. on how to.
Yes, yes. So we'll be sending out the recording of today's workshop, and we'll include a few resources on the website. We'll link there for your reference. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope everyone has a great Friday, a great weekend. I hope everyone stays safe, and we hope to see you at the next workshop. Okay, bye everyone.